Rumors have circulated that Spencer Dinwiddie was mentioned in trade conversations at the trade deadline, and the Detroit Pistons were one of those teams that were interested in making a trade for Spencer Dinwiddie. Now, Dinwiddie has, said probably numerous times, hey, I've got no interest in going back to Detroit, even though that's the team that drafted him, doesn't really have an interest in returning. But interesting that the Pistons had an interest in trading for Dinwiddie at this previous trade deadline, and of course, no move was made as Dinwiddie remains with the Nets.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure what the Pistons' mindset really was with that thought process. I like Spencer Dinwiddie. He's an underrated basketball player, a borderline all-star when he's given the opportunity to start and play big-time minutes. But I don't know what it is with this team and point guards, but they just got this fascination with being interested and wanting 10 different point guards on the roster. It's really confusing. I like Spencer Dinwiddie. Again, I think he's a good player. Can score, can facilitate, has good size, and I'm very much of the belief that the Pistons made a huge mistake giving up on him years ago when they did. Obviously, this is a new front office now. It's a new coaching staff. I get all of that. But when you look at this team and you look at their trajectory, Spencer Dinwiddie, just like Fred VanVleet, which we've talked about before, really doesn't fit the timeline of where this team is headed, especially when the Pistons are set to have one of the top picks in the 2020 draft, which is a draft class full of point guards that are top 1, top 3, top 5 lottery projected. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And this is one of those things that I feel it's not just something that's going to go away now. There was just interest at the deadline. The Nets are a team that their future is kind of interesting. They have Kyrie Irving, they have Kevin Durant, they have DeAndre Jordan, and everyone else is kind of fair game. The only reason DeAndre Jordan is safe is because Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are big friends with him, and that was part of the arrangement was they would come if they could bring DeAndre Jordan with them. But pretty much everyone else in that roster is fair game. They're up for trades. They're available in the market. And, this is something that I could definitely see the Pistons coming back at and circle back in July and say, or maybe even, the end of June before the draft or whatever, and come back to the Nets and say, hey, what's your stance on Dinwiddie right now? What do you want for him? What is it going to take? I think that there could still very much be an interest in Dinwiddie beyond just this season. That's obviously why you would want to trade for a guy. It's never just a half a season deal in most cases, especially with a guy like Dinwiddie who still has multiple years left on his contract. It's an interesting situation. I don't think the Pistons should be looking at Dinwiddie as much as I like him, but they are. And I don't know what that says, if that exactly breeds confidence in the front office when they're looking at trading for a guy that doesn't fit the timeline of where they're headed. It's interesting. I'll leave that one right there.
When I saw it on Twitter, I thought it was a Twitter prank at first. I thought it was a Twitter prank because of all the times we've seen, honestly, Dinwiddie on Twitter say he's not coming back to Detroit. He never would. And so I was like, oh, we're just being pranked. But then it was real because, the Twitter handle checked out. And like you said, Aaron, it's a little confusing that I like Dinwiddie just like you like Dinwiddie. I'm pretty sure everyone in Detroit likes Dinwiddie. It doesn't seem to fit the mold of, hey, we're rebuilding, we're trying to build this thing back up. This is the timeline. Going after Spencer Dinwiddie doesn't fit the timeline like you said. So it's confusing. I'm not sure what it says. It tells me they're still interested. Like you said, they're interested in him in the long run. So they're probably going to make that call again in the offseason. Why?
Because this team is hell-bent on trying to put together a winning roster. Ed Stefanski is dead set on reloading, in a sense, for next season. I'm very firmly in the belief of that being the case.
I can't get down with that.
Why? I can't either.
Can't get down with
I can't
that.
either. It doesn't make sense. Your team had their chance last season and this season. And last season, you backed into the 8th seed, got swept in the first round. And this year, yes, you had terrible injury luck. But the rest of the team folded. No one stepped up high enough to keep you afloat. And unfortunately, you put together a team that was injury prone. You knew going into the season that that was the risk you were taking. So are they really about to walk it back and go get a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie, who one, doesn't want to be here, or at least has said he doesn't want to be here, which I don't have any issues with him not wanting to be here considering how his time went here. And two, you are not going to put together a roster that is capable of winning in an offseason. Right. When Blake is, going to resume basketball activities in June, so you'll have him. But outside of that, the rest of your roster is kind of in flux. You've had issues with Luke Kennard, Christian Wood's an unrestricted free agent, and the rest of your roster, I mean, they're going to keep Derrick Rose, and then they'll have Svi Mykhailiuk. What else? Tony Snell is not a guy that's going to help you get to the playoffs.
Right.
He's a fine player. He's not going to help you get to the playoffs. Not to the point where he is a ceiling raiser or anything like that. He's a fine basketball player. So for them to be interested in Dinwiddie, it shows that they are still interested, and not just interested to the point where it's a pipe dream, it's something that'd be nice. They're interested in the point where they're willing to part with assets that would benefit them in the future to try to put together a winning team right now. Because there's no way you're getting Dinwiddie for pennies on the dollar or anything like that. He's a good player, and he's on a pretty decent contract. There is no situation where you walk away with Dinwiddie in some bargain deal. So, to me, this is one of those situations where the front office is showing their cards, and they're saying, look, we want to improve our roster for next season. We're still in this with Blake Griffin and Luke Kennard and whatever else we're able to scrounge together, and we're going to try to go play in the playoffs.
That sounds so terrible.
And
that sounds so terrible.
One more thing on that. They're going to go out and get another point guard when they've already acted like Derrick Rose is their most valuable player. It's just another compounding move that doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. Again, like Dinwiddie, he's a good player, but this team has no business trying to trade for him when they are on the timeline that they are on.
It just doesn't add up. And you just start to ask yourself, like, how do these guys get NBA executive positions? And why does a guy like Tom Gores own an NBA franchise if he's going to make these kind of decisions that are really just bonehead decisions?